We recently cut apart your typical Docs that you can buy like any mall, any department store, and we also cut apart the original Doc Marten makers in Solevares who still make them as close to the original Docs that built the name as possible up until today, just under a different name of Solevare. But we haven't covered the made in England Docs that are made by Doc Marten in England, allegedly made to the same specs that they used to make them to when Solevare used to make the boots for Doc Marten, AKA Doc Marten by Solevare. So today we're gonna cut apart the made in England Docs, run it through a test to really figure out which is the best Doc Marten that you can buy, what's the best value, which one's better between the Solevares and the Doc Martens. Over time, your favorite sports and your teams, you start to lose interest in them, mostly because you just don't have the time to keep up with them anymore, and the new players you don't know as well, or you just lose interest in the sport generally. And that's where the sponsor of this video, Underdog Fantasy, comes into play, because Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy football. Draft your teams online with no in-season management, get optimal scores each week of the season, and have a shot at over $15 million in total prize money in their Best Ball Mania 4 contest. And to me, I've always liked the idea of fantasy football, but the whole management thing, I just didn't want to spend the time to do it. But with Underdog Fantasy, their app is super easy to use, their website's super easy to use, and like I mentioned, there's no in-season management at all, so you're still eligible to win some of that prize money. So head to UnderdogFantasy.com or to the App Store to download the app and sign up with the promo code RoseAnvil, and Underdog is going to match your first deposit up to $100. Again, that's Underdog Fantasy, and sign up with the promo code RoseAnvil and draft your Best Ball Mania 4 team today. And make sure you check to see if it's available in your state. Make sure you understand how all the picks work and read the fine print when it comes to that matching deposit. And thanks again to Underdog Fantasy. We've covered the history of Docs and Solevares, so to quickly go over it so you get the full picture. 1950s, German doctor, Dr. Marten creates air cushion technology. The 60s, he tries to grow the brand and franchise it out, essentially. The Griggs family in England buys that, but they don't have the ability to make the soles that they bought the license for. So they contact MPS, who is the maker of the Solevares today, to manufacture the sole for them and put it all together for them. And from 1960 up to 1995, NPS manufactures Dr. Martens by Solevare until their contract ends in 95, when NPS patents the word Solevare and continues to make Dr. Marten-esque boots under the Solevare name. Fast forward to 2003, Dr. Marten's really hurting, almost went out of business, so they had to ship the vast majority of their manufacturing from the UK to Asia. And now in 2023, the only manufacturing that Doc Marten does in England is the Made in England line, which are about $90 more. And everybody says that the Made in England Docs are the best of the best, even better than Solevares. Through and through, they're better. The original brand, the name, the original specs. So that's what we're gonna figure out, if they are actually better and if they're worth the extra price. Because the details of this boot are, the brand is obviously Doc Marten. The style is the 1460 vintage Made in England lace-up boot. They weigh 1 pound 7 ounces. They retail for $260, which is $90 more than the regular Docs and $40 more than the Solevares. And obviously they're made in England. So if we start looking at the details of this boot, starting with the leather first, the things that we've looked at across the board so far with this mini Doc Marten series when it comes to leather is thickness, cross-section, and performance of the leather. So if we look at the thickness first, comparing the Solevares to the Made in England Docs, the Solevares were 2.1 to 2.2 millimeters thick. The Made in England Docs are right at 2 millimeters, so a slight edge to the Solevares. Next, if you look at the cross section, the Solevares had a good slab of the grain if you compare it to the Docs. The Docs might have just a slight less grain compared to the Solevares, but it might be hide to hide, and once again, it's so close that it could be a margin of error within manufacturing. As for how this leather feels, they feel about the same. You know, the Solevares feels like it's a little bit more conditioned of a leather. The Doc Martens feels a little bit more on the dry side. It's not quite as dry as the regular Docs. The only problem with these types of leathers is that they have a really heavy plastic coating on top to give it that classic Doc Marten shine. But the cool thing about the Docs is this top coat is allegedly the same formula and everything that was on the original Docs that NPS made from the 60s up to 95. And it is slightly different. It's a little bit more pebbled. It's got a print in it, just very slight, versus the Solevares is a really high finish. But because of that plastic coat, you can't really condition these boots because that conditioning just sits on the plastic. So if you condition these boots, you have to condition them from the inside, which is a little bit of a pain. It could get some oil on your socks, it can close up the pores, but it's already kind of a hot leather anyway because the plastic coating. So on the surface, the Solvair is slightly better, but you could condition the Doc Martens to be just as good. Then last to the performance of the leather, well, we burned both of them and they acted about the same because of that plastic coating. And we did the puncture test as well. The Solvairs did 50.5 pounds and the Doc Martens made in England matched that perfectly at 50.5 pounds. So looking at the leather as a whole, which is better? The Solvairs is slightly better, but it's not a huge gap. You know, it's just a little bit better here and there, a little thicker, a little bit more conditioned, but not enough to sway me one way or the other if you're not looking at price. And then if we look at the inside of the boot with the counter first, the Solvairs had a pretty nice thick fake leather counter at 2 millimeters thick. Obviously real leather is going to be more durable and it's a better choice, but for this price range it's somewhat expected. Compare that to the made in England Docs. It has basically the same counter as the cheaper Docs made in Asia. It's only 0.5 millimeter thick, but it's backed with a little bit of a synthetic counter. But even still, it's only 0.5 millimeter worth of material to wear through at your heel before you have a flap in there and it starts giving you blisters. So between the two of them, Solvair is clearly better. As for the rest of the components, the lining is basically the same, maybe a little bit better on the Solvair, slightly. The lasting material is exactly the same at a 3 millimeter thick fiberboard. The only difference between the Solvairs and the Docs is the Solvairs has this half sock liner with a little bit of foam underneath. It's gonna give you just a little bit more squish, but once again, it's just a very marginal difference. Next, if we move to the internal bits, because we've cut apart a pair of Docs before, so we know what's in the inside, so we'll double check it once we get it cut in half. But the Solvairs have a synthetic felted material that seems like it's a fairly dense and thick felted material. You compare that to the made in England Docs, which is it's similar material, but it's a lot softer. There's a lot less material there and it acts a lot like foam, where once you really compress it, it bottoms out, versus the Solvairs is a lot more substantial. So you're gonna get a lot more contouring and a lot more comfort over the long run. But one thing we know for sure is not in the Docs that the Solvair has is that wooden shank. That shank is gonna support that gap caused by the heel. It's gonna help prevent the boot from boating up and losing all its structure and becoming super uncomfortable. And a really easy way to tell if the Docs that are made in England have a wooden shank is just giving it a little bit of a bend. And if we hear a crack, then we know. No crack. Pretty confident that there's no shank in there. So looking at the internal components, the Solvairs still have a slight edge with the better counter, better filling material, the wooden shank. This difference between these boots is fairly significant and you will feel the difference underfoot. And then last to the final component to go over, which is the outsole, and one of the more controversial aspects of these boots because they use a PVC outsole. Both of these brands claim they're Goodyear welted, but they're not technically a full Goodyear welted boot because most Goodyear welted boots have a stitch that sews the upper to the welt and then a stitch that sews the welt to the outsole, or at least the midsole, and then the outsole is glued on. But with the way that they attach the outsole in Solvairs and Docs are through basically heat fusing them together. They both have a machine that has a red hot knife and a presser foot that as the red hot knife melts both of those layers, that presser foot squeezes them together, bonding them together. But the only problem is these Docs that are made in Asia, you can rip them apart by hand. People have failures with them. Based off of everything that we've seen, it's still a fairly rare failure, but it is still a failure point. And the Solvair significantly improved on that by having a wider footprint for the two layers of PVC to bond together, and it was a lot harder to rip apart. So how does that compare to the made in England Docs? Well, it's built the exact same way with the same process, and after we get it cut in half, we'll try to rip it in half. But the biggest difference between these outsoles, they made the little lugs really, really narrow. So you have less surface area, which means faster wear down of all these lugs. Because if you compare it to even the made in Asia Docs are almost twice the thickness of the lugs. Not the depth, but the actual like width of the lug. Then you compare that to the Solvairs. The Solvairs is significantly bigger. So if you look at the hardnesses of these outsoles, both the Solvairs and the Made in England Docs are at a 65 short A, telling us that with the more surface area on the Solvairs, that should make these last significantly longer before you bottom this out and it becomes smooth and you're slipping all over the place. This is a better outsole. And even the structure of it's better because the structure of the Solvairs is you have this lattice structure right underneath the ball of your foot that it's not the best way to make an outsole, but it is gonna give you a little bit of squish and it's not gonna have a lot of the high pressure spots caused by the bigger lattice structures on the other parts of these two outsoles. Compare that to the Doc Martens and you can see from the inside that it's not the same big open cells, it's more of a triangular cell, but it still has that big foam patch at the ball of your foot that's gonna make these boots really comfortable initially, but as you wear them more and more, you're gonna bottom them out, and it's gonna maybe create a little bit of a high pressure spot if you wear that foam out. And we also did the bar drop test, and they performed about the same. The Made in England docks were about 1/4 of an inch less than the Solivers, so I wouldn't say one's better than the other for the bar drop test. So comparing the outsoles, the Solivers is clearly better. It's gonna last longer, it's gonna be more durable and more comfortable underfoot over the long run, but we don't know how hard it is to rip this outsole off the Made in England docks. So let's cut this thing in half, give it the rip test, and finally decide which is the truest Doc Marten, which one is the best value, which is best overall, and which one you might want to go with.
Boromir would have remembered his father's need. He would have brought me a kingly gift.
No, okay, perfect. All right, we got it cut in half. And if you wanna see more Doc Martens and Doc Marten-esque comparisons to really find the best Doc that money can buy, support this video, subscribe, because if this video does well, we'll probably keep doing it and maybe grip fast next. So subscribe, because that's the only thing that YouTube cares about apparently, and they barely show you what you're subscribed to. So let's see what's inside. Okay, it's cut. Now it's time for my favorite part. Let's see if we can hand rip this Doc Marten apart. Starting at the toe. All right, already better than the Docs you can buy from the mall. Let's try the heel, see if we can get this to go. It's not nearly as easy as the regular Docs. It's about the same as the Solivers, I think. So let me give it a little cheat, a little cheating knife. So you can see that it's actually ripping the PVC welt. It's not ripping apart where the welt was bonded. Nice. That is a good sign for Doc Marten, the Made in England at least. Because if you look closely, you can see that lighter color on the edge there. That is the PVC from the welt ripping, which means the bond did not separate except for the ball of the foot, which is technically where most people see the failure, but it's way harder to tear apart than the regular mall Doc Martens and right on par with Solivers. So when it comes to the construction, that heat welding, they're about the same. And now we can see that it is the exact same thinner felted material, and we burned both of them to see if we could smell if it was wool. And there might be a little bit of wool in there, but it's mostly a synthetic felted material, and obviously no wooden shank. So now let's tally the results and really see who makes the better boot. Starting with the leather, the Solivers is slightly better, but very slightly. The counter cover is significantly better in the Solivers. The lining is basically the same with a very slight lead on the Solivers. The footbed is the exact same footbed, but the Soliver comes with a little bit of padding in the heel and a leather top for that sock liner. The midsole, clearly the Solivers is better, and it also has that wooden shank. And then the outsole is also better on the Solivers. And then the way that they're constructed, we just showed by ripping both of these apart that they're bonded about the same. Maybe I'd give a little bit of the edge to the Solivers because of that weak spot in the docks right there, but that could easily be chalked up to a slight error on one boot and one boot being slightly better, the way I pulled it or the angle. So I would say it's still really close when it comes to the construction and the heat welding. So overall, without looking at the numbers and the prices, which is the better boot? Well, I think it's pretty clear that Solivers is a better boot. But if you look at it for the price, the Doc Martens are $40 more than the Solivers. And so the better boot is $40 less than the Doc Martens. So still the Solvair is better. So why would you actually want the Doc Martens? Well, you do get that yellow stitch. You do get the classic Doc Marten name and that Quylon leather that's allegedly really close to the original Doc Marten leather. That's about it. You maybe get a little bit extra comfort of the ball of your foot, but you lose the durability. So really what you get for that extra $40 is the Doc Marten name and a yellow stitch. And to some people that might be worth it. But I think to the majority of people, the Solvair is a better choice. So if you haven't seen the previous videos of the Mall Docs and the Solvairs, go check those out. And let me know what you guys think is a better Doc-esque boot than even the Solvairs, or what other ones you want us to cut apart. We've got a lot of requests for the Grip Fast, so if you want to see that, support this video, because if this video does well, we'll probably do the Grip Fast, but if it flops, then we probably won't. So thank you guys for everything. This is super fun to do. I love busting brands on their BS. It's so much fun. And it is nice when a brand redeems themselves, because this is a representation of what docs should be and what they used to be, even if they're not quite up to the same Solvair standard. So thank you guys. See ya.